this is Anugrah Rao. Welcome to the 59th episode of Microsoft Art of Code, brought to you by Millionlights. Millionlights is a TV channel dedicated to improving skills of people and their employability. Now, let me tell you more about Microsoft Art of Code. Microsoft Art of Code is a series of lectures, courses, and talks by experts who are going to discuss the latest Microsoft technologies, topics related to programming, and industry forecasts that are all focused on employability. This course is basically for people pursuing computer science. This content has been created by our partner Microsoft. And today we have Christopher Harrison and Suzanne with us who will be discussing everything you need to know about creating website with Python, Flask and SQL. Create, configure and connect to SQL databases. Learn to structure your code. Check out advanced UI options. Find out what Jinja templates can do for you. And get started with Bootstrap. Get the skills you need to publish a professional website and level up your Python and Flask knowledge. Now, let's move towards the course. In the previous course, we covered installing a library, import library into your code, and create a connection to the database. In this episode, we will cover how to add row to a table, and we will see a demo to insert a row from the database. Layouts in Jinja, in which we will learn why and how to use layouts, and about advanced layout. Demos on Jinja templates in action. So let's get started.
Now I want to say add a row to a table. So I've only got a connection. I'm not really doing anything in the database. So let's see if we can maybe insert some records into our table. So that way our website, when somebody enters a new question, we'll be able to insert into our database with our code. So what we've done so far, if we think about the steps, we've installed our library, we've imported into our code, we've got a connection to a database. The 3 steps we're missing is we need to run an SQL command that will do the insertion. We'll need to save our changes with the commit command and then close our connection. So the insert statement is the command we use in SQL to add rows to a table. So it's basically sort of insert into a table name. You say what the column values are you're providing values for, and then you pass in the values. So if you sort of imagine for a second, so we have the table name is questions, so we say insert into questions. We list our column names here, question name, description, category ID, and so on. So we just list the columns here. Why do we list the columns? Because that way when we see the different values below, we know that hockey fact is the value that goes in question name. How long is one period of hockey is the value to go into description. So this basically tells it what order we're providing the values in. So that's the basic syntax of an insert statement. So we're going to basically execute that command from inside of our code. And the way we do that is we have to create a cursor. So we're going to create a cursor on our connection. And then I'm going to write a text string. Now you can put all this in one line, but I find it really helpful to create a variable. I like to call it SQL command or something like that, or insert command.
The MySQL command.
MySQL command. I can call it string insert command. And there I write this big long string, which defines the actual SQL statement I want to execute inside the database. Mm-hmm. Now I did do one thing slightly different here, and this is we're not going to get into all the things you can do to improve your security in a database. But if you read up a little bit about SQL, you have to worry about something called SQL injection. That's where people sort of spoof your database and send extra things in your commands to run extra commands that create their own user IDs and things.
Yeah, in a nutshell, if you're using string concatenation, so if I'm taking something that the user typed in and I put, select from where, and that's typically where it winds up going, where column name Steve equals, and then I say plus, and I put in the input from the user. What the user can actually do, and it's so simple for the user to do it, is they can actually just inject their own bit of SQL code. That basically you just put in a single parenthesis, you put in a semicolon, and then you put in the rest from there.
Command that says create a user called Susan with a password of Joe.
Yeah, exactly.
And now they can hack your database.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, it's honestly, I can do one hack Like that's it. That's the only hack that I'm able to do with SQL injection, because it is just that easy. But the real nefarious part of this is the fact that it's so easy, but yet so potentially dangerous that a couple of things would have to go wrong, but it wouldn't be very difficult for somebody to actually just take over the entire server and then use that as a launching port into the rest of your network. So it's something you do want to take very serious. And you'll notice that when we bring back up the bit of code there, that it's actually pretty simple to avoid that. You'll notice that we just simply said values, and we just put in placeholders. And then down below, we have the actual values. And then when you send it back, it will then avoid that potential SQL injection attack.
Right. So all you do is, instead of saying values and in parentheses actually saying, the variable name for a question, it holds the question name and so on, by just using this syntax here where we say, I'm going to give you 4 values. Each one is represented by a question mark. And then we declare an array called anything you like, which contains the 4 values which you want to pass in. And then when you execute it, you say, OK, when I'm ready to execute that cursor, we say, well, here's the command we want to execute, and here's the values to plug in where those question marks were located. So here's the array that contains the values to plug in for those parameters. So a little bit different to protect you from SQL injection.
Yeah, and it is worth mentioning just real quickly here that you'll notice that we didn't use name parameters. ODBC doesn't support name parameters, and that's why we didn't do it for anybody who's experienced with SQL. One other real quick thing to mention here is, and there's been a lot of different questions about people trying to install the package and getting errors. So a couple of things I want to mention. Number one is double check your typing PyPy ODBC, all lowercase letters. Number two is maybe change from that pip to easy install, as Susan showed earlier. Hit the little drop down. Potentially run this as administrator. I have to admit, this is an error message that I've never received on PyPy ODBC, and I've installed it on a host of systems. So that's sort of the best bits of advice that I can give you there. So in any event,
All right. And if anybody else has hit the error message and fixed it, please share it on the Q&A with the others.
Sure.
That's the other thing I'd say as well. Let's help each other out here too. Now, then, once we've done the insert statement, then the next thing we'll do is we'll save our changes. The way we do that in code is it's myconnection.commit. So that's the command there. That basically means save. So commit is actually the SQL command for save my changes. And then we'll close our connection when we're done, which is just tidying up after ourselves. So when you put it all together, you see this big, scary chunk of code. But when you break it down, it's not actually that scary, right? We import the library. We connect to the database. We declare our cursor. We write a SQL command that we want to execute in the database. We specify the values that we want to insert when we do the insert statement. We execute that cursor, passing in the command we want to do and the values to use for our parameters. We save our changes. And all I've done here, though, is I've added some extra error handling here to try and make it really nice and tidy, because it's possible that when we try and connect, it might fail, or it might fail when we try to do the insertion. Those are 2 different commands. They could cause different errors. So you'll notice that I've actually got error handling here for what to do if the insert command fails, and I've got error handling here for what to do if the connection command fails. So really trying to write really good practice error handling in this situation. So I'm going to take another shot at the cookie and insert a row into my database here. So I've already got my connection to the database. So this is already working. So I'm already halfway there. So all I need to do now is go to my connection and create a cursor. And I'm going to save that in something called my cursor, just to annoy Christopher. My cursor equals. And then I'm going to have my SQL command that I want to execute. And that is going to be the insert. Oh, I like to use the, if you've noticed, by the way, I'm putting a parentheses, like I'm declaring a string variable. But instead of typing it this way, I keep putting a parenthesis in front of it. That's actually a little Python trick, because it allows me to put the command over multiple lines without having to put any sort of line concatenations or anything. So that's a neat little trick I like to use inside Python. So it's question name, the columns are question name, description, fix that. It's not case sensitive in SQL, but trying to be good habits. Correct answer, besides I want that cookie. And category, cannot type ID. Okay, And those are my columns. And then the values I'm going to pass in are going to be passed in as parameters.
There are your values. Question, 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 question. There'll be something here.
Yeah.
One of the things to note while Susan's typing all of this into the background, she's going to go in and build up the array here momentarily. But I do want to mention that if you are looking to get more into doing SQL querying, stop me if you've heard this before, there is an MVA for that. So we do have MVAs on querying SQL Server, and we've actually got a whole host of MVAs in general on databases. So if you're looking for more info, you can definitely check that out. So, and
all right.
We're almost done here.
Yeah, I'm ready to tell my cursor to go ahead and execute now. Whoops,
Yep.
That is case sensitive.
And you'll notice you've got SQL command and values as different cases. So just giving you a heads up.
Okay, yeah, thank
I'm
you.
making it way too easy for you to get.
Yeah, you're trying to help me out. I really appreciate that.
Yep.
Yeah, SQL command and values. So I can tell it to execute that command, and once that command is executed successfully, then I can save my changes by committing the changes. You can actually call commit either on the connection or the cursor.
Okay.
If you do it on the connection, then all the things you've been doing in that connection will be saved at once. If you did it on the cursor, it would only commit the changes for that command you'd executed on that specific cursor.
So for our purposes, we can just close it on do it on the connection.
Right. Okay. And so then I'm going to say if that works, then give me the cookie. And otherwise, come on. I'm going to say now I get a cookie, right?
Yep. Maybe.
All right. So let's see how this goes. Now, I think I'm entitled to one typo mistake if there's something in there, but let's see how it goes. All right. Let's see. So I run this, and it says now I get the cookie right. But you're going, well, how do I know it really worked? Well, what I was doing was saving code to a database.
Yep.
So if it really wrote that record to the database, then I should be able to go to my database management tool, Management Studio. And if I go to my quiz database and I choose the option at the top here, there's this button here, New Query, then I should be able to open a query window, and I should be able to say, please tell me, and this is another SQL command, select star, which means select all the columns from the questions table, and execute that, and there is my record successfully inserted. There we go.
I was half tempted in the background to go in and delete it.
Yeah, no. So, do I get the cookie?
Not yet.
I'm expecting 2 cookies at this
Nope,
rate.
only one.
I got 2 working demos here. I think I deserve an extra cookie. Okay, so we know we've successfully inserted that record, and if you really, want absolute proof, I can even go back here if we want, run it again, and it'll actually, in this case, it'll actually insert a second row, just so you know it wasn't pre-done. It says, so if I run the code again, I can actually go back to SQL Server Management Studio and run that same command again, and now you'll actually see it's got the record twice.
Yep.
And it's letting me do that because I didn't set up one of those primary keys and restricting having 2 records of the same name. I am going to I'm just going to delete that so I only have 1 record in there because I don't like having a bunch of rows in there. But what I will do is I am going to go here. I'm going to make sure I have exactly 1 row because next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read that row back. Because I've just successfully written 2 days. Now I have 1 record in that table. So if we go here, I have exactly 1 record. And now I'm going to write code that's going to retrieve that record back. Because retrieving records is a little more complicated because you have to have a way of saying, okay, I ran the command. How do I get those values back into my Python code? So that's the piece of the puzzle we're still missing. So how do I retrieve a row from a database? Well, in SQL, the command we use is the select statement. And the syntax is select. You say which columns you want. You pass in a table name, and you say which record you want. So in this case, for example, I'd say I would like the description and the correct answer columns, because that's what I'm going to display on my web page to the user. So that's going to get me back the value in the description and the correct answer columns. Which table? Well, the questions table. So that's my table name. And then which record do I want back? Because here I've got 3 different records. How does the select statement know which record I want back? I say, get me the record where the question name is hockey fact. And that would be this record here. So that's going to bring back these 2 values. So I've got this is my fancy PowerPoint animation. Okay, you got to give me the wow factor on this one. So you select where question name equals. Oh no, it gets better. Look at this. See, it selects the description, and the correct answer. I think I deserve a cookie just for that PowerPoint animation.
You're focused on this.
I tell you. All right. I was proud of that PowerPoint animation. The way we execute it in our Python code is actually exactly the same way we executed the insert command. The only difference is that the command we're executing is a select statement instead of an insert statement. We still pass in a parameter, so except we're passing in a parameter this time is indicating which record we want back. And then we call the execute method, passing in the command and the values for the parameters. Exactly the same thing we did for the insert statement. So this hopefully is starting to look a little familiar. Now, one of the things, though, is because we're not actually changing data, we're just retrieving data, you don't need to do that commit command because you're not going to have to save or commit any changes. You're just retrieving data. But then comes a question. After we've executed the command, how do we actually get the values back into variables so we can actually display them on a screen and do things with them in our code? There's a method on the cursor called fetch1. That will allow you to retrieve one record at a time. There's also a fetch all, which allows you to get all the records at once. Depends on how you want to work. So what fetch1 will do is it actually returns an array that contains each column that was returned. Now that array, let me show you this sort of in code on the slide here. So let's say I create an array called results, and I said that's going to hold the results. Again, this is one of my super fancy PowerPoint animations here to appreciate. So row 0 of the array is going to contain the first column, row 1 of the array is going to contain the second column, and so on. So the array only contains one row of results from the select statement, which is a little confusing. So I say, get me the record where question name is hockey fact. And so it goes and gets the record, which has a value, a question name of hockey fact, and it gets I asked for description and correct answer. So it takes the description, that was the first column I asked for, so that goes in the first row of the array. Because the second column I requested was correct answer goes into row 1 of the array. Remember, indexes are start at row 0. So that's a little confusing when you're not used to it, but the more you work with select statements, it will become second nature after a while. So in code, that ends up looking something like this. So what you'll see is we execute our command. That's the same thing we did with the insert. There's our call to fetch1. We say, go get the first record. And then we take that result and we put it into this array. And I decided to call my array results. I could have called it Steve or Bob or whatever you like. And then to access the results, remember the first row of the array will contain the first column I selected. The second row of the array will contain the second column I selected, and so on. So let's see if that all works. And this is what it would look like if you all put it together complete with the error handling. So you have a nice complete code example for reference for yourself for later. But I think the real test is, can I do this in a demo? Take 3. I'm 2 for 2 so far. No pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure. All righty. So let's take this code, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to comment out this code here because I don't want to delete it. And instead, I'm now going to, so that's code to insert a record. So I'm going to comment on that code, and instead we're going to add code to read a record. So in this case, our SQL command is going to be equal to select. I want the description and correct answer. That's what I'm trying to return. And just need my open bracket there. Paren, bracket. From the questions table. And I want the record where the question name equals a value to be specified shortly. Okay, so I have my SQL command. I'm just going to fix that, trying to be good about my casing here. And then the values that I want to pass in, what am I going to specify for that question? Just the one value, which is hockey trivia. So there's the value that will be plugged in, so it's going to get me the record where questions equals question name. And actually, now that I look at it, this line of code here is exactly the same. So I just need to execute my cursor when I'm done. And now I've executed after I execute the cursor.
You have a space in front of it.
Oh, yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
If it was a squiggly, I would have found it.
I'm making this way too easy.
Yeah, I guess so.
Here, Susan, just have a cookie.
And then after I've done that execute, then the next step is going to be to fetch the first record. So this is now going to have returned a series of values. So I actually need to, mental blank here. I need to, when I do this, I now need to say, okay, I'm going to say create an array called results to hold the results back and go to the cursor and say, hey, would you please go get me the first row? So I call that fetch1 to say get me the first row back from that select statement. So it's now in my array. So I should now be able to print those results and say that has a question of, and I have to go to my results array and say, get me whatever's in the first row of that array, which is row 0. And that should be the description column. And I will say that the answer is
Blowing in the wind.
Yes, exactly. Results. Well done.
Thank you.
1. Showing your age again. And I'll just tidy that up a little bit. The spacing isn't going to change the execution here, but just looks a little tidier. All right. So let's, moment of truth. Now I must get the cookie.
Must, huh?
Must get the cookie, right? Okay. So we execute our code. And you can see it's gone off to database, come back, figured out, it told us the question with the name hockey period is how long is a hockey period? And the answer is 20 minutes. So I get the cookie, right?
I don't know. I mean, you've been using a local database. What about Azure?
You are, what? You mean you want me to do this with SQL Azure now? Because in the last chapter, I created 2 databases. I actually created the quiz database with the questions table on the local database, SQL Server, but I also did it on Azure.
Yep.
All right, you're on.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm now going to just change all that code, but it's all going to happen using Azure as a database instead of SQL Server as a database. What do I have to change? All I have to change is the connection string. That's it. That's the only thing that actually needs to be changed. So I just have to specify an appropriate driver. I'm still using the PyPy ODBC library. I'm still calling the connect method. And the difference is, though, I'm going to have to specify the server is going to be that big, long Azure server name we saw in the portal. The database will be whatever I call my database. My user ID and password has to be the appropriate user ID and password to connect to my Azure database.
Yep.
And there is one extra parameter you have to specify when you're connecting to Azure, which is called encrypt equals yes. That is because Azure requires you to use secure sockets, and encrypt equals yes is your way of saying when I connect to the database, I'm going to use secure sockets. It's a more secure type of connection with more encryption.
Yeah, one little thing here that I just want to interject is one of the things that Susan demoed earlier is the fact that you can actually go to Azure and go grab the connection string, and you'll actually notice that there is an ODBC connection string that's available inside of there. The one little catch to mention there is that the connection string that is on Azure wants to use what's known as the SQL Native Access Client,
oh, yeah,
SNAC.
Yeah, the driver that they use, where it says driver on the slide here, where we have driver equals SQL Server, if you take the connection string from SQL Azure, where it suggests connection strings, it gives you a different driver. I couldn't get it to work with the driver provided.
You need to just step back and use SQL Server. Yep.
Yeah, so do use SQL Server for that, because that was one of the moments where I'm going, why isn't this working?
Yep.
But now that I fixed that, I know it'll work well. So let me just go make that change and in our code. Okay, so let's change our connection string. And I guess I'll do the insert statement first. That might be easier because there's no record to select right now. So I'm going to comment out this code. And I'm going to bring back to life my insert statement code. All right, so I'm going to, now if I successfully insert a record into Azure, do I get the cookie?
No, because you also need to read it back as well.
Oh, man, you are demanding. Maybe I'll just do that all in one fell swoop. We'll do it in 2 steps. That's fine. Okay, so what I'm going to need to do is all I really need to do here is change the server name. So I'm going to go over to Azure. I'm going to go back to my database here, go back to the dashboard, and bring up the connection strings because I don't want to be typing in the server name here. That's awfully long, this big long string here. You do want to include that TCP and the port number of 1433. You do need to include that in your connection string. And actually, I'm just going to, I'm going to leave this in my code, and I'm just going to, what I will do is I'm going to do it again. I just want to save it there so that if anybody is looking at my code later, they have the example with SQL Server as well as the example with Azure. So let's just do that. This is my example with SQL Server. And this will be my example with Azure. OK, so what I want to do is v server name. Of course, now I no longer have that in my buffer, so I'll have to go copy that again because I was doing things. Put that back. And this, as I said, one of the times when cut and paste is your friend, not the enemy. So I type in that big, long server name. The database is still called QuizDB. The user ID here is this Mikey big, long name here. So I'll just copy and paste that.
That's what all of his friends call him, Mikey. Big, long name.
Yeah, hey, Mikey, he likes it. And then I have the password. So there is now, my connection is now connecting to Azure instead of connecting to SQL Server. But all the other commands should be exactly the same. So let's just kind of say, I got to open my cursor, SQL command, got my values, execute commit, and close the connection if it doesn't work. All right, so we run, and it says, OK, now I must get the cookie. I'm just going to go over to SQL Server. I want to go prove that record is there. So I'm not making things up here. So we go over here, we create a query, and we say, hey, let's select star from questions. Oh, it would help if I typed the table name correctly. So it appears I have a record successfully added to my Azure, because this is my Azure database. This is my local database. There's my Azure one. So now all I need to do is comment out this code here, which is doing the insert.
And one thing to highlight here while she's going in and commenting and uncommenting is that the connection string stayed the same. That, again, she's just updating the SQL command that she's going to execute. And obviously, she's going to read a value rather than saving a value.
And I'm just going to change it to hand over the cookie. And no one gets hurt.
There you go.
All right, this is my last demo. So if this one rolls, I expect the cookie. So yeah, all I've done, remember, is all I did was change the parameters to my connection string. That's all I've done. Everything else is exactly the same. And now I go and run, execute, fetch. And there it is. So hand over the cookie, my friend, and no one gets hurt.
Yay. All right. Now, I want to close everything out here just because I got, I got
no pressure now.
Yeah, I want to get it into a demo. Well, no pressure at all. I've got the code pre-baked. So here's what I want to do is I want to show off how we're going to incorporate this code back into our application. And so you're going to notice here that I have a brand new Py file that I've created, zoom, 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 and you're going to notice right there that it's called SQL Client Py. And you're going to notice that just like Susan had before, we're going to import PyPy ODBC. You're going to notice that we're going to create that class, and we're going to give it the exact same name that we had before. So instead of it being SQL Client, we're going to call it Client. And if you remember from before our meal break, we had called it Client as well. So we kept that same name. And we also kept the exact same method calls. So you'll notice that we got getAnswer, we got getQuestion, and we got SaveQuestion. So all of that's the same. What's different, of course, is that now we're going to be using that database behind the scenes. And so you're going to notice that I've got my connection string, which I did go ahead and hide. So there's our little connection string. I'm going to go ahead and call connect on that. I'm going to grab a cursor. I'm just doing that in the constructor. And then inside of here, I'm going to make the call into the database to insert the question and select the question. So it really is the same code that that Susan.
Just call me server, yeah.
I just called you server. That Susan over here used just in a different place. And then the other thing that's worth mentioning, and actually, you know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy that, and let's paste that into our model here.
Yep, because that would be model code.
Paste. There we go. And that was weird. Right-click, copy, right-click, paste. It already exists. Why did you
It's
not
right there.
automatically? Yeah, it's.
If your demo fails, do I get an extra cookie?
Oh, I know why. Because I think we're grabbing the wrong one. Let's try SQL Client. And
yes, because that's the new file you're creating. That's right.
And paste. That is hilarious. Where You know, every now and then, Visual Studio is just telling you to shut things down and to reopen. So that's exactly what I'm going to do here.
This is true. On Visual Studio is generally a very robust tool, but there are times when it gets like it does something like that. You're telling me the file's there, but I'm not seeing it, or it's not refreshing the visual properly. Sometimes, honestly, exiting and coming back in again.
Yep, there we go.
That's all you need to do.
And you'll notice that's all I had to do.
Yeah.
Just close and reopen.
Just the
Thank you for
solution.
calling the help desk. Have you tried turning it off, turning it back on again?
Yeah, in this case.
Okay.
Yep.
So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, now that I've got it in there, I'm just going to update one little line of code. In fact, I'm just going to change 5 letters to 3. So instead of it using Redis client, I'm now just going to tell it to use SQL client. That's it. And so now when I launch this, Control F5, and I hit yes. Oh, I also need my PyPy ODBC. I didn't import that.
Make sure you add that package.
Yep, so I'm actually going to do it a slightly different way. So I'm just going to say PyPy ODBC.
Oh, you're editing your requirements.txt file that says what packages you're dependent on in your code.
Yep, so now I'm just going to right click and say install from requirements. This is one of those little things that I like to do because while Susan showed earlier that yes, you can right click on the environment and say install from package, or I'm sorry, generate requirements text, it requires, no pun intended, that you remember to always do that. And if you're anything like me, and I know I am, I have a great memory, but it's really short. And so what'll wind up happening is I'll go, oh yeah, I need to do that. And then, I'll get distracted by something shiny and I'll totally forget about it. So I really do like just adding that into the requirements text file. Let's save it first. And then let's do my install and give this just a couple of seconds. Chugga, 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 and there it is.
The library listed.
Yep. So now, what I'm going to do is go ahead and rerun this. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to go straight to question, whack hockey trivia. And you saw Susan, or Trisha, hockey trivia, and you saw Susan create that a couple moments ago. So this should now pull that down from SQL Azure. We'll just give this a moment here.
You're back on the page. Yeah.
You know what? Let me just close that and let me come back over here and let me reopen.
Yep.
Okay, and now.
Create question.
Hold on. And question and hockey trivia.
And I believe that is the way I entered it in terms of casing.
That's what I remembered.
I'm looking at my code here, just double checking. Hockey trivia. Yeah, that is what I entered. That is in terms of the case sensitivity.
There we go. So give me just 1 second. Demo. I'm just going to do this real quick just to make sure that it's saving. I swear to you, I tested this at lunch. For crying out loud.
Boom. Yeah. Oh, man. That's all right. We'll get it going.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah. Okay. I swear to you, I tested that at lunch. I'm like, okay, well, I just want to make sure because, one of the biggest issues that you can run into is the firewall. So I just wanted to make sure that we had the firewall. So I've got PyPy ODBC. I've got my SQL client. I've got my views, SQL client, import client. You know what I'm wondering? Did I change a method name somewhere along the way? Save question, get answer. Save question, get answer.
Have you? Are you doing this to the SQL Server client or to SQL Azure?
This is SQL. This is my SQL client.
This is your personal. So this is SQL Azure. You're connecting to the SQL Azure database. Okay.
Yes.
Do we know for sure your IP address is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right then.
Cool. In fact, here I can show you that I'm just going to go back to the pre-baked one. All I did was copy a file. So here's the pre-baked one, and you'll notice that if I go to question, hockey, trivia, all right.
Why don't you create a brand new question?
No, let's.
No? All right. We'll come back after the break.
let's go ahead and take a real quick 10 here. I'm going to go back in and I swear, I tested this at lunch because, again, I was afraid of the firewall issue. So I'm like, all right, let me just real quick go in and create, it's possible that my IP address might have changed. So let's go ahead and take 10. We'll come on back. I'll have that working, and then we'll start taking a look at the front end.
Sounds good.
So we'll see you guys in 10. All right, well, welcome back one more time, and one more time we just need to clean up a little bit of code, but before we get to that, that's still Susan and I back. I'm still Christopher Harrison, and this is still SQL, Python, and Flask. Now, just because this has been my day, something went sideways. And what wound up happening was I actually did, during our meal break, is I actually went into the code and updated everything because I wanted to make sure that I had the connection string right, because a lot of mistakes can happen there. Wanted to make sure that we had the IP address in the firewall, because again, a lot of things go wrong there. So I went in, I updated the file, saved it, everything worked. And then I don't know what happened, but somewhere between that moment and the moment that we went live, that file just like disappeared into the ether. So I went back in and re-updated it. And so what you're now going to notice is there it is with the correct connection string. And I didn't make any other changes. I just, fixed the connection string. And so now if I fire up this page here, we'll give this just a moment to load. And I just simply go to question hockey, lowercase q, there we go, hockey trivia. You're now going to notice that it loads up that question, and I can type in an incorrect answer, and sure enough, now everything works. So again, we did have it. Just again, this is just going to be the way that things are going to work.
Yeah.
So
the server name
right.
was. So, yeah.
Yeah, but that's it. It's, I had it typed in, and it lost it in the file. That's all right. So with that, let's go ahead and roll on in to into layouts and Jinja. And one of my
I'll just enjoy my cookie while you do that.
Yeah, you enjoy your cookie. I'm going to go back to my amazing blue slide here. So here's the thing: when you stop to think about it, you're going to create an application, but you're not going to provide a user manual. So even if somebody did want to read the fine manual that you provided, you're not going to give them one. And so you might be thinking, well, that seems like it could pose some problems. And you know what? You're right. It can pose some problems because my users are now basically sort of feeling their way around, trying to figure out, okay, well, what are we supposed to do?
Sure. If I visit a website for the first time, it's not always really obvious where I go and what do I do on each page to make things work.
Exactly. So with that in mind, there's a couple of strategies that we want to keep in mind here. And the first is follow conventions. That what you're going to notice on a lot of mobile sites is a little box that will be in one of the upper corners with 3 little lines on it, and it's what's known as a hamburger. True story. Now, that can, see, there you go. It's a hamburger. I'm getting hungry again. But in any event, the goal of that hamburger is that when you click on that, that's now going to provide some form of a menu system that you can then dig into and kind of go from there. And again, when you first look at that, there's nothing that actually tells you that, but it is a convention. Sort of like you'll see the little magnifying glass, although that sort of looks like a lollipop in my drawing. But you'll see the little magnifying glass, and again, that's a convention that if you hit that, you're going to, of course, get
search.
There you go. But along those lines is be clear, and you really do have to know your target users. So if your target users aren't overly web savvy, throwing a hamburger at them, can I get a hamburger, Barry? There we go.
Yep. Not everybody's familiar with that convention yet. It's a relatively new convention.
Exactly. So maybe you decide, you know what, we don't want to use a hamburger. Maybe you want to use a hot dog instead. See what I did there? No. You don't have a hot dog. That's all right. Thanks, Barry. But maybe instead of having a hamburger, maybe you just write out the word menu. Because the great thing about writing out the word menu is, what's going to happen when I click on menu?
Maybe the menu's going to come up?
There you go. You're going to get a menu. So, be clear. But regardless of what you do, be consistent. And consistency really is key here.
The worst thing you can have is two different developers building a website together, and half of them set up the navigation one way and half of them set up the navigation a different way. Yep. So the poor user is on one page, they know what they're doing, and then they go to a new page and everything's laid out differently. It causes a lot of confusion.
Exactly. And this is where what are known just sort of generically as layouts come into play. And depending on the web environment that you're going to be using, these will have different names. But for right now, we're just going to call those layouts. So why use them? How do we use them? How about some advanced layouts? Well, let's talk about why. And so when you think about your web pages, you're going to have kind of a typical convention that you're typically going to have your logo up at the very top. You're going to have your navigation that's maybe going to be at the top or over on the left-hand side.
All the little links to move around the website.
Absolutely. Yep. You're going to have your copyright information, your footnotes, whatever else down at the bottom. Please hire us. And then last but not least is you're going to have that ooey gooey center. And that ooey gooey center, of course, is, in fact, a technical term. And that's where the individual pages content is going to wind up going. So you're going to have that consistency here of there is our page and there's our logo up at the very top here. There's over here on the left all of our links. And then what I'm going to do is on the individual content, on the individual pages, is I'm just going to provide that little content that's going to go right there. So I don't want to have to recreate that outer structure, that jello mold, if you will, over and over and over again. I only want to focus in on that ooey gooey center. On top of that, when you go in and you start creating that over and over and over again, as I've shown, you have a chance for mistakes. Things can go wrong. And most importantly, what happens if something changes? I mean, if you have 50 layouts, let's say, and you've decided to change your logo, you don't want to run around to those 50 layouts and update that logo. I mean, you've, again, got better things to do with your time.
I worked at a company that went from being incorporated to limited. So we changed the logo from company name Inc. to company name Ltd, and it was in our logo. And the person who had built the website did not design it in a way. They'd done the dreaded copy and paste to all the different pages, and then literally had to go update 62 different pages just to change the little company logo. So I have lived what you're describing.
Yeah, that's just bad. So let's talk then about using Jinja to handle our layouts. Now, the way that Jinja actually does this is by what's known as template inheritance. Now, the only reason that I didn't mention the phrase template inheritance yet is because I wanted to just use the more generic term layout, because every web technology has something similar, and so this is Jinja's implementation. It's called template inheritance. And so the basic steps here is define the base template, and then define the blocks that can be overridden for individual pages. And I think it's best if we see a little diagram. So let's start over here on the far left side, and this is going to be my base template that I'm going to generically call layout. And you're going to notice that we've got our really awesome little logo up the very top. We've got our navigation links over there on the left-hand side. And then finally, last but not least, is we've got a placeholder, and this is going to be our ooey gooey center. So you're going to notice the color scheme here is that ooey gooey center, this is going to stay green, and that's where our data is going to wind up.
So when you create layout.html, you don't put a whole bunch of stuff there, because that's what you're saying. I'll give you the content for that a little later?
Not necessarily. So what you're doing is you're creating the shared component. So I'm going to want the navigation on every single page. I'm going to want the logo on every single page. And there might be other things as well. So you might have, for example, let's say like a Twitter feed over here, and maybe you're going to have, the icon for the user's cart up there, and maybe you're going to have something else down here, maybe like a login, logout, who knows?
Sure.
So I don't want you to focus in on the amount that you're creating. The real key here is when you're creating this layout, what you're looking for, and this is really the key, is whatever is going to be shared.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Across all your pages.
I was just asking if where you have a placeholder block was where we don't.
Oh, okay. No, inside the placeholder block, there's really not going to be most likely anything.
You said your big focus is on creating all the content. It's going to be shared, but it's going to be common across web pages.
Exactly.
And the stuff that's going to be different from web page to web page in the layout.html file is going to be pretty sparse.
Exactly. Yep. And so, well, and again, not necessarily
Okay, no,
sparse, but yeah. And so, but
just keep going.
Yeah. So here's the thing: is when we go in and now create the individual page, what you're going to notice is what we're going to define is nothing on the outside. So we're not going to define the logo. That's already been done.
Yep.
We're not going to define all of the links. That's what's already been done. That what we're going to do instead is just focus in on what's important here for this individual page. So what do we need to build for answer question? Well, what we're going to need is a display for the question. We're going to need a text box, and we're going to need a button there. So that's what we're going to need, and that's all that I'm going to build. Now, what Flask is going to do with the Jinja layout is it's then going to, when somebody does something to bring up that layout, is it's going to combine both of those and send those out the door as one page. So that's what the user is going to see, is just that one page. Now, I left the outlines around the individual components, but I want to stress something very big here, which is the fact that, and I just want to get to the right slide, is the user going to notice anything different there? And the answer to that question is no, they're not going to notice anything different, anything odd. That I left those blue lines around it just to kind of delineate each of those objects. But the user's just going to see a simple page. Everything is going to be combined. Can you have multiple blocks? 100%. And just to kind of keep going, do you have to provide default content? You don't. Do you have to provide content for every block in a child? You don't. Both of those are going to become a little clearer as I go backwards in slides to right here.
Okay.
So we took a look at the concepts. Now let's take a look at how we're going to build this. So here's our base template, or our parent. And you're going to notice again terminology. Some people will call this a base. Some people will call this a parent, whichever you want to call it. I really like parent-child when I'm talking about this. So there's our parent. And so what you're going to notice is that we've got our logo. We've got our navigation. So whatever our normal HTML is to make all of that happen. And then there is the placeholder for that ooey gooey center. And so what you're going to notice is that this is done by creating blocks. And all of our blocks have a name, Steve. And inside of those blocks, and remember again that we're in the base template, you can, if you want, provide default content. You don't have to, but you can. So if there is something that you just want to naturally provide, so maybe, for example, you were creating a block for a sidebar. And so you had kind of default content for that sidebar, but on an individual page, maybe like a product page, you needed to replace that sidebar with something else. So now what you've done is you've given the developer of that product page the ability to swap that out. And if they decide, you know what, I don't want to do anything with that sidebar, then they just simply don't mention it, and it will then use your default content there. Now, bringing that back into then the content page or the child page, what you're going to notice is we're not going to provide any of that outer structure. That all that we're going to do is just provide the inner structure. And you're going to notice that we're going to say block and then whatever the name of the block is, and then whatever content it is. So inside of there is going to be that little block right there with our couple little text boxes and all of that mamma jamma stuff. Cool. So that's the syntax there. There's our couple of frequently asked questions on how all of that comes together. The one last little thing is, let's say that I'm in a child and I mention a block name and that block name doesn't exist in the parent. What happens? It's going to break because Jinja's then isn't going to know where to put any of that. Okay. So let's get in and let's see this in action.
Absolutely, because this is one of those ones that this is one you really appreciate when you see it. But it is a fantastic way to design your web pages.
Exactly, yeah. Now, keep in mind, we built this application over the course of 3 courses. And when we started this, we didn't cover template inheritance. And so as a result, we didn't use this. Well, now we're going to do template inheritance. And we're now going to go back and update our pages to use this. And you're going to notice that this is pretty straightforward. But keep in mind that typically when you're designing an application from scratch, you're going to start with
Yeah,
this.
now that you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
you
So
know, yeah.
I don't want you to think as you're looking through this that, oh, I now have to always go back and re-update this. Absolutely not. That you can always start with all of this. Okay. So let me go into to my templates here, and I'm just going to right-click, and I'm going to say Add, and I'm going to say New Item, and I'm going to choose an HTML page, and I'm going to call this Layout.
So that's going to be your
HTML.
Parent page.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's going to be my parent. Yep. And so now let me go in and give this a title, Awesome Trivia App, and let me go ahead and inside my body section, let's go in and say H2 Awesome Trivia App right there, and that's it. So I still have a block to put in, but the big point that I want to make for right now is I want you to notice that this is just HTML.
Yeah, this looks like just the same HTML I'd put on any web page.
Absolutely. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create that that block, and that's going to be my little % block, and then we'll give it a name, Steve.
So this is the Jinja you're adding now.
Yes, this is exactly the Jinja that I'm adding now. And so now let's go in and end block, and let's go back and just say H3 default content. So I'm just adding in default content, just as an example. Content. That second N was silent. All right, and I should probably give that a better name than Steve, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so.
So we'll go ahead and we'll call it main.
Sure, do you want to call it block main?
No, I want to call it main. So, and keep in mind here that you can actually name this whatever you want. And again, you can have multiple blocks. So if I was going to set up a sidebar on my page, then I could absolutely go ahead and say sidebar right here. So,
cool.
100% you can add in multiple. Okay. There we go. So now I've got that. So now what I want to do is I want to start updating my pages to use that layout. And so all that we're going to do is get rid of all of the HTML for starters. Now, why are we getting rid of the HTML? Well, remember that the outer HTML, that's going to be provided by the layout, so we don't need it. The only thing, again, and I love the little, there we go, I love my little logo, is the only thing that we need to provide is just simply that part right there. That's
the ooey gooey center?
The ooey gooey center. Yep.
All right.
And so when I go back into Visual Studio here, all that I have is just simply the ooey gooey center. Now I need to tell it which page I want it to use for the layout, and that's going to be %extends and then the name, and it doesn't need to be in quotes. Layout.
So this is how it knows where to go read all that Jinja sort of. This is how it figures out who its parent is and what stuff to bring in when it displays.
That's exactly it. Yep. And so now I'm going to say block, and then let's give this a name of main. There we go. And let's go in and say % and end block. There we go.
So this is where this is the Jinja syntax that allows you to say, use this with that parent template.
Exactly. And so now what I'm going to do is first of all, I'm going to take out a little insurance here. First of all, I'm going to kind of update my page, and I'm going to move a little bit quickly here in just a moment. I'm going to end block. I'm going to take out some insurance just because I've had demo issues all day today, so I just want to make sure that this is going to come up.
Test it on one page before you do it on all of them.
Exactly. There we go. Okay. See, it's working.
I can see the header of it came from you, because that awesome trivia app was in your layout.html file.
And that's exactly it. Yeah. So that's coming from my layout. And in fact, just to belabor the point here, let's go back to Visual Studio, and let's just do this. Let's say inside my layout. Obviously, you wouldn't do this. Let's go in and say from layout. Yeah. So obviously, you wouldn't do that, but it'll give us the opportunity to show, hey, look, that is coming from the layout.
Yes.
See?
Yep. That's
there you
cool.
go. So that's really it. And so if you went in to create a brand new page, then you're not going to provide that HTML. You're just going to provide that ooey gooey center. And you're also going to notice, and this is one of the things that I like about layouts, is that the syntax is pretty sparse, that there's not a lot that really needs to go into this. So I can actually just kind of cruise through all of this. Boom.
So you're just going through each of your content pages,
right,
and then taking off all that, all the stuff that was defined in the parent page, and saying, hey, that's already in the parent. So instead of just having that code everywhere, let's just tell all the pages to reference that parent page and inherit all that, standard template, standard title and stuff from the parent, and then you're only defining your ooey gooey center on each of the individual pages.
Exactly.
And that's nice, because it means if you do want to change that title or add an extra logo or something, you're only going to have to change it in the one place, in the parent.
And that's exactly it. We sort of proved that earlier by my going in and making that little change there and block. So now again, you'll notice that I updated all of those pages there pretty quickly, and I didn't belabor the point a whole lot because again, I mean,
just doing the same thing,
really.
really.
There's the syntax, exactly. But you'll notice that didn't take me real long to go in and do, and that's sort of I think the perfect job for an intern, to set them up and just kind of start playing around with that. But it really is just that simple. And so now when I go in and I save this and I launch this, you're going to notice that I'm now going to have that consistent structure throughout all of my pages. So if I bring up my create, you're going to notice there's my title, my question, my answer. If I go in and I say question, hockey trivia, you're going to notice that again it's still got the header from my layout. Sorry, I needed a drink of water there.
Yep.
Okay, so there it all is, and then I could go in and let's say 20. Actually, I think you typed out 20 minutes.
I did.
Okay. There we go. And so sure enough, it tells me that that I'm correct. If I went back and I just simply said 20, maybe in a version 2 we could, put in a little bit of fuzzy logic. But in any event, now you're going to notice that it tells me, sorry, I'm incorrect. But again, we've got that exact same layout. We've got that consistency throughout our application. That's really what we're after here. We're really after that consistency, and that's sort of the goal with all of this. Okay. Now, let's get a little bit more advanced here and get to the right slide. There we go. How about advanced layouts?
Christopher, how about advanced layouts?
I'm glad you asked. So rather than replacing the default content, what happens if we wanted to add to it? So again, let's go back to that little sidebar. And let's say that the sidebar on our e-commerce site was going to have a shopping cart on it, and this is going to be my little shopping cart. There you go.
Is that a person riding in a shopping cart?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's a very big handle.
Okay.
So there's my little shopping cart. Maybe it's got the number of items and so forth, and maybe that's out on our sidebar. But what I want to do, and it's got a hamburger in it, and what I want to do is I want to be able to maybe add something to it. So if you go to a particular product page, maybe there's a sale that I need to identify. So what I want to do is I want to add to the sidebar, but I don't want to replace what's already in there. And that's where we get into super blocks.
That's awesome. I like that.
And with a super block, what I can now do is say, hey, look, I want to go get the content that was in the parent. So here's our base template, our parent. You're going to notice that we provided a disclaimer by default. Now what we want to do is we want to still have that display. And the way that we're going to do that is by adding in a call right here to paren super.
And if we didn't do that, then the content that you put into the parent for that block would have just been overwritten.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we've seen here. That if I go back to Visual Studio, you're going to notice, let me go get my layout. There we go. Is I added in default content.
Oh, yeah, you did.
But if I bring back up my page here, and I have no idea whether or not I've still got a browser window open with it or not, so I'm going to launch another one. Check. And as it turned out, I did, but that's okay.
Yep.
Let's go in and hit create. You'll notice that default content not
showing.
Not appearing in this film.
Yeah.
So what I want to do is I want to close all of that out. There we go. And let's come back over to, let's go to create.
Yep.
Just going to do this on create. Great question. Beautiful. And let's
we have to do
just
our
put it
super.
right up at the very top. Exactly, yeah. So let's just say paren, super, and there we go.
Dum,
and
da-da-da.
now let's go in and launch this one more time. And then you'll notice that there is our default content. And what's nice about using this is it once again puts the power back into the developer of that child page, of the individual page. Now, one of the things that I find happens quite frequently is the people who design the layout often take away too much power from the individual page creators. And there is certainly a very fine line there that you don't want to give people the ability just to run wild and put whatever it is that they want, wherever it is that they want. You know, you don't want to run the risk of having purple Comic Sans MS throughout your entire application.
Well, not throughout. On one page, and then the
one
next page
yeah.
is bright blue and, and sans serif. You know.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, you want to be very careful about the amount of control that you decide to take away and the amount of control that you decide to give. So there's a little bit of a fine line there, and it's why I really like those super blocks, because by utilizing those super blocks, now I'm going to say, all right, well, here's the default content. You can use this, but you can determine where in your flow it's going to make the most sense. So I find that it's just kind of a very nice little middle ground there that you can draw. So you can say, hey, look, I'm going to give this to you. If you want to use it, great. And if not, well, you can sort of determine where you want it. So in any event, so that's the basics of layouts. Now, I got to admit, and if we take a look at my browser here real quick, that's still pretty ugly.
It is. I mean, it's consistently ugly.
And that's what we were looking for.
We got consistency. So goal one was consistency. But I have to admit, that looks like a web page Susan would build. And that is not a compliment. My apologies, because, yeah, I make ugly web pages. I'm not a good graphic designer.
And honestly, neither am I.
Yeah.
But this is where Bootstrap comes into play. So what do you say we take 10 and we'll talk about Bootstrap. We'll see you guys in 10.
That's all in this episode. I hope this tutorial was helpful. In the next episode, we will continue with the remaining part of this course, which is creating website with Python, Flask, and SQL. Is your mind ringing with questions, queries, or doubts? Do you wish to learn more? Then visit our website www.millionlights.org and post your questions on our forum. We will be really happy to clear all your doubts. If you missed anything and want to rewatch it, you can download it from our website or can watch online as well. You can also participate in our webinars, discussions with the subject experts, as well as get Microsoft certification on various courses through our website. You can also find us on Facebook by the name Millionlights and also on Twitter. For more such interesting tutorials on coding, app development, programming, and building rich UIs, keep watching Microsoft Art of Code, brought to you by Millionlights. Thank you.